The term goth is thrown around often and is used to describe a very wide variety of things, from a style of medieval architecture to a genre of alternative music to a way of dressing to the Germanic tribe that conquered the Roman Empire. Today I'm starting a new series in which I discuss the history of the term as well as try to give a definition as to what it actually means. I present to you my new series, Black Planet: The History and Philosophy of Goth. Between the 3rd and 5th centuries, the Romans would face invasion from Germanic tribes, with the Western Empire eventually succumbing to them in 476 AD. Europe was thrown into what some referred to as a Dark Age, with new kingdoms popping up out of the carcass of the dead empire and invasions and pillaging becoming widespread. These tribes that brought about the end of one of the most powerful empires in human history and spawned a new age were known as the Goths. The Goths, or more specifically, the Visigoths and Ostrogoths, conquered their way through Europe, leaving their influence in France and Italy and creating the Visigothic kingdom in Spain and Portugal. They established new codes of law, combining elements of their original Germanic laws with Roman laws, specifically covering land rights and marriage. All the while, Christianity was slowly growing throughout Europe and was accepted and adopted by Visigoth leaders. Eventually, however, the last Visigothic kingdom would be destroyed by the Moors and the peninsula would come under Muslim control. At this point, the Goths essentially ceased to exist. Although the Goths had disappeared, from the 12th century all the way up until the Renaissance, a new style of architecture would grow, dominating France, Britain, Spain, Germany, and to an extent, Italy. During the Renaissance, Italian architect Giorgio Vasari would name this style Gothic, a derogatory term used to classify it as barbaric and uncivilized. Gothic architecture was characterized by its grandiosity, large arches, and beautifully colored windows. For the most part, they were built out of stone, unless you're in Italy where they favored bricks. Gothic towers were built tall so that they could reach into the skies and get closer to God. Speaking on Gothic and Greco-Roman architecture, the German polymath Oswald Spengler wrote, "The Gothic style soars, the Ionic, or Greco-Roman, hovers. The interior of the cathedral pulls up with primeval force, but the temple is laid down in majestic rest." End quote. In other words, the temples and homes of the Greeks and Romans were grounded and down to earth, while the later churches and cathedrals of the Middle Ages were always looking up to the heavens, always expanding and seeking new horizons. From what I've described thus far, it would be tempting to conclude that there is no real relation between Gothic tribes and architecture and the more modern Gothic music and subculture. However, that brings us to our bridge, or more specifically, when the term Gothic no longer meant barbaric and uncivilized, but finally reached its more modern connotation of something dark and mysterious. That bridge would be Gothic literature. In 1764, English writer Horace Walpole would publish The Castle of Otranto, later republished to have the subtitle of A Gothic Novel. The author used the term Gothic in reference to the now decaying Gothic ruins and churches all throughout England. Darkness and decay were now fundamentally tied to the term Gothic. The book itself deals heavily with the supernatural, death, and questionable marriages. The story tells of a prince named Manfred, who is determined to ensure that his descendants inherit the family's castle. However, there is a mysterious curse, and Manfred's son, Conrad, is killed on the morning of his wedding to a princess by the name of Isabella. To keep the dynasty going, Manfred divorced his wife and married Isabella. This story was wildly influential and sparked the imaginations of many writers to come. Anne Radcliffe, one of the many pioneers of Gothic fiction, was inspired by this story and went on to write many novels of her own, including The Italian and Mysteries of Udolpho. She expanded on the supernatural and dark elements of the genre, landing a spot as a new genre of fiction. Gothic literature would also spawn the iconic stories of Frankenstein and Dracula by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley and Bram Stoker, respectively, introducing more existential and philosophical elements to the genre. One of the most famous American authors of all time, Edgar Allan Poe, would create tons of poems and short stories that all fit neatly into the Gothic genre. Now that we have some names out of the way, It's time to discuss the actual elements of Gothic literature. Gothic literature is characterized by its dark settings, eerie atmospheres, supernatural occurrences, powerful emotions, and even madness. Reflecting this sentiment, Edgar Allan Poe wrote in The Raven, "Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before." This quote perfectly encapsulates the genre. It dares to dive into the unknown, into the mysterious and the mystical, into the darkest aspects of humanity. Poe, in particular, had an interesting style of writing. Despite many other writers at the time, Poe would often make the narrator an untrustworthy character, so that the reader would not be able to tell if what the narrator was saying was true or not. In his short story, The Telltale Heart, the narrator tells us how and why he killed an old man, while desperately trying to convince the reader of his sanity. The narrator goes on to explain how he dismembered the body and placed it all throughout the floorboards of the house. After the murder, the police arrive to inspect. The narrator tells us that the police knew exactly what he did to the old man and are simply there to taunt him. He had no real reason to believe this, but the narrator believed it nonetheless. All the while that he is freaking out over the police, he swears that he can hear the thumping of the old man's heart underneath the floor. In a frenzy, the narrator confesses to the police, "Yes, yes, I killed him. Pull up the boards and you shall see. I killed him, but why does his heart not stop beating? Why does it not stop?" And the story ends there. No happy ending, no real conclusion at all. The story abruptly ends as soon as we reach the climax. Just like that. Another element of Gothic horror is its emphasis on the past blending with the present. This only makes sense when you consider that the name comes from the Gothic ruins that, while no longer as lively and new as they once were, still remained in the same places that they were built. Vampire stories such as Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu, I probably butchered that name, illustrate this masterfully. In the story, a mysterious young woman is taken in by the narrator and her father for protection. The young woman, whose name is Carmilla, seems to fall in love with the narrator, with Carmilla telling her that she would never love anyone else the way she loved her. As time goes on, however, our narrator grows sick and gains a ghastly appearance, only deteriorating more by the day. She wakes up feeling as if two sharp needles were driven into her neck. She experiences vivid nightmares and sees strange creatures in the shadows at night. All the while, it is becoming abundantly clear that there is something off about Carmilla. One night it becomes apparent that Carmilla is not sleeping in her room. This may not be so unusual if it weren't for the fact that her door was locked shut every night and appeared to be untampered with when it was revealed that she was not in her room. A general pays the narrator and her father a visit and recalls a story of how a vampire by the name of Malarca killed his daughter. Upon seeing Carmilla, the general attacks her before she escapes, exclaiming that Carmilla and Mercala are the same person under different names. It is then revealed that neither Carmilla nor Ah, I messed it up. It is then revealed that neither Carmilla nor Malarca are her true name. She was an Austrian noblewoman by the name of Mercala, who supposedly died hundreds of years ago, only to become a vampire. The general and the father find Mercala's grave, dig it up, and open the coffin, revealing a very much living woman sitting in a pool of blood. They thrust a stake into her heart and decapitate her, ending the terror once and for all. Some might see Carmilla as a simple vampire story, but it is much more than that, as it shows Gothic literature's focus on the past bleeding into the present. A vampire, someone who has been alive for hundreds of years, appearing in the form of a young woman, only to feed off the living for sustenance, very clearly reflects this theme. The last element of Gothic horror that I will be covering is its fascination, or even its demonization, of science. In stories such as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson and Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, men push the boundaries of science and force the reader to realize just how bad things can get. In Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, A detective is tasked with uncovering the origins of the mysterious criminal Mr. Hyde and his strange connection to the more sociable and well liked Dr. Jekyll. At the very end, our protagonist discovers Mr. Hyde's dead body in a letter in which Dr. Jekyll confesses that he created a serum to transform himself into a different person as an outlet for his negative emotions and tendencies. This manifested itself in Mr. Hyde. At first, Dr. Jekyll had control over it, but as time went on, it took full control of Dr. Jekyll's body. He would sometimes wake up already transformed into Mr. Hyde without even having the serum, committing crimes he had no recollection of, scribbling blasphemies into his own prayer book. The list goes on. This finally ended with Dr. Jekyll unaliving himself. In the case of Frankenstein's monster, a mad scientist determined to create life stitched together human body parts he dug up from graveyards, and using strange chemicals and a mysterious spark, brought this monster to life. Immediately, Frankenstein is appalled at his own creation. In playing God, he has created a devil. The monster itself spends the rest of its days trying to figure out its place in the world, only to come to the horrifying realization that it has no real place in this world. Its only real purpose is to pursue its creator for the rest of its life. After Frankenstein's death, the monster also commits unaliving by setting itself on fire. Stories such as this were being written during the 1800s, a period in which scientific endeavors were being explored in a way that had never really been seen before. Gothic literature served not only as a way to counteract this culture, but to warn of the possible danger of allowing science too much control over our lives. To briefly summarize, Gothic literature was dark, countercultural, and romantic. These elements would not only inspire authors and poets for centuries to come, but would eventually contribute to the lyrical themes of a certain musical scene that was beginning to take shape in the 70s. Thank you all for watching today's video. This is going to be a multi-part video series, and in the next video, I will be covering Gothic music in the subculture itself. I originally wanted this to just be a single video, but the script was taking forever to write. Like, I've had this open since summer, maybe before summer, honestly. It's been forever. I've had this script forever, and I haven't even finished it yet. I still have some work to do on it. But anyway, it was just taking so long to finish the script for this one video, and I hadn't really made any videos of substance in months. So it just made a lot of sense to split this into like a series instead of just have one like 80-minute long video. So once I'm finished, I hope to edit all the videos together into one really long video, like what Wendigoon did with his conspiracy theory iceberg series, if any of y'all are familiar with that. So if this series interests you, or you just want to learn more about history or philosophy, please subscribe. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss when I make my next video, because this next part is, I just said it's going to be about the subculture and the music. And I've already got that part of the script close to being done, so that should be out in the next 2 weeks, hopefully, but we'll see. So thank you for watching this, if you did watch to the end. And, you know, subscribe, turn on notifications, share with someone you know. And yeah, just thank you. Goodbye.